Herman. I work in JTS's Department of Community Engagement, so pleased to welcome you to the Stories and Storytelling series. I want to welcome any first-time attendees of our Monday webinar series. Today's session will be taught by Dr. Judith Hauptman, Billi, Ivry Professor Emerita of Talmud and Rabbinic Culture at JTS. Our session is what 6 very short stories in the Babylonian Talmud tell us about Jewish law and life. Rabbi Andelman is away this week, so we have Ellie Gettinger, Director of Digital Learning, will be hosting and moderating our session today. I just wanted, if you're feeling inspired by this opportunity to learn with JTS's outstanding scholars, we invite you to partner with us by sponsoring a learning session. We have 3 sponsorship levels: Chacham for $540, Tzaddik for $1,000, and Navi for $1,800. You can learn more and sponsor a session by visiting the registration page for the series. I'm going to post a link in the chat as well. Just to go over the the structure of our session, as we usually do, Dr. Hauptman will pause for questions periodically throughout the session, and again at the end. You can chat your questions to Ellie Gettinger during the Q&A period. She will select a few of the questions to present to Dr. Hauptman. For any technical or logistical questions, please initiate a private chat with either myself or Lynn Feynman. The sources for today's class were in the email that you received this morning. We'll be screen sharing them as well. I'm so pleased to introduce Dr. Judith Hauptman. As I mentioned before, that the Billi Ivry Professor Emerita of Talmud and Rabbinic Culture at JTS. Dr. Hauptman's research focuses on deciphering how the Talmud came into being, as well as investigating women's roles in Judaic thought. Dr. Hauptman has authored several books in the areas of her research, as well as many influential articles. Her newest volume, from which the stories in this session will be drawn, The Stories They Tell, Halachic Anecdotes in the Babylonian Talmud, is coming out in September. And you can learn more about Dr. Hauptman in the bio that was included with the sources. I'm going to go ahead now and turn it over to Dr. Hauptman. 1 second, Dr. Hauptman, you're still muted. And
yes, okay.
Yes, go ahead. Okay.
I'm unmuted. I'm going to begin with some introductory comments, and then we're going to go to the text, and we're going to read them Hebrew, English, and I'll comment on them as we go through. I'm hoping to cover all 6. Worst comes to worst, we'll do 5 and 5 out of 6, and you'll do the last one on your own. So when we think of Talmud, when you hear the word Talmud, what usually comes to mind is the word halacha, Jewish law. All right. You may also think of debates. You may think of teachings based on biblical verses, and you may even think of long stories in the Talmud. And some of them are very famous. I'm not going to refer to them. People rarely pay attention to the very short anecdotes in the Talmud. When I refer to a short anecdote, it's a story, but it's just a report of how one rabbi, or possibly a few rabbis, performed an already stated halacha. So I'm calling it a story because it's not a rule, it's not a prescriptive rule about how you should behave in the future. It's saying this is what, Rabbi X, Y, and Z, how they behaved on a certain occasion. So that's what I mean this morning by story. There may be a little bit more to it than that, but that's what I'm talking about. Now, when people think of Talmud, they usually say to themselves, oh yeah, up until a certain point, not even clear when, Talmud was transmitted orally, eventually written down. But earlier times, it was transmitted, from one generation of rabbis to the next. And we usually say that the people who put the Talmud together, orally or written, makes no difference at the moment, they utilize the principle of economy of language. No superfluous words, because if you're going to commit it to memory, the shorter the better. So I asked myself, why did the editor or editors of the Talmud include these very short reports of a rabbi I'm going to use the word Amora, A-M-O-R-A, interchangeably with rabbi. I'll say what that means in just a moment. But why did the editors of the Talmud include what appear to be throwaway lines? Rabbi so-and-so, fasted on Yom Kippur. Does that teach me anything? Is there any reason that should be there? Okay, that's not a great example, but just I'm giving you an idea. All right, the traditional answer to why these very short anecdotes are in the Talmud is that they show us how rabbis meticulously carried out the law, that they were pious, that they were role models. And yes, I accepted that explanation for a very long time until I began to notice quite a few years ago that if you look closely at these short anecdotes, they seem to show an Amora, rabbi, carrying out a previously stated law, but in the process of carrying out, he, and it's always going to be he today, in the process, he changed it in a minor, generally speaking minor, but sometimes even a major way. In other words, the people who have been studying Talmud for years and years and years, shall we say more men than women, these people have been studying Talmud, they look at these, simple little lines and say, very nice, so I'll be a good Jew too. And I'm saying that what we usually consider to be the immutability of halakha, that halakha, Jewish law, does not change, I am claiming that in these lines, in these little stories, I'll comment on their frequency in just a moment, in these little stories is embedded a message that later rabbis may, have permission, are allowed to change the rules that were enunciated, that were put out there by earlier rabbis. And if I am right, and I've just written a book arguing this thesis, so if I'm right, there's implications for today. I'm not going to spend time on that, but clearly, if the Talmud itself is endorsing modification of Jewish law, of halakha over time, then that certainly gives people today in the various movements what to base their changes on. Okay, so let me continue. And, oh yes, at this point, I will just hold up. This is the cover of the book that of mine that's going to come out shortly. The stories they tell, halachic anecdotes in the Babylonian Talmud. At some point, JTS will put it on its website, should you be interested in reading it. And it's coming out simultaneously in softcover and electronic version. All right, so I have to do a little more introducing, and then we will go to the text. I don't know if the people on this call are students of the Talmud and have years and years of exposure to Talmud, or whether you have none. So I need to say the following. Most Talmudists today, obviously I'm a Talmudist, we have come around to thinking that the Talmud has evolved in layers. In other words, what am I talking out right now against? People used to think that somebody would pose a question and then somebody would give an answer, and then the next person would pose a question, and then two people might debate it. And they used to call it, a tape recording of what the rabbis were talking about in the Beit Midrash, in the study hall. That's not the case, all right? Talmudists like me, and I really do represent the majority now, we think the following. The earliest layer of the Talmud, as this is well known, is the Mishnah. The Mishnah came out, shall we say, orally. We don't know when it was put into writing, like the rest of the Talmud. 200 Common Era seems to be more or less the date of publication of the Mishnah. Fine. And then what happened shortly after the Mishnah is kind of published? Rabbis began studying it, and then they began studying it in association with other contemporaneous teachings that were not included in the Mishnah, and we call those Brightot. That word won't pop up very much today. So the earliest layer of the Talmud is the Mishnah, and then Mishnah with associated contemporaneous teachings. Then along come these rabbis from the years 200 to roughly 550. We call them Amoraim, A-M-O-R-A, Amoraim, and they commented on the Mishnah and the associated teachings. So they didn't just put their comments after the Mishnah and associated teachings. They interpolated their comments right in between. So if a earlier text said, oh, we learned to fast on Yom Kippur from this particular verse in the Bible, the later rabbi might insert, in between the Mishnah and the next part of it, might insert a question such as, I don't know, why do we fast, or when does the fast begin, and when does the fast end, and so on and so on. So it's not a linear development. It's a layer, earlier layer, what I'm calling the Mishnaic or the Tanaitic layer. Then the rabbis of the Gemara, whom we call the Amoraim, this is the next layer, but it's not separate. They're interpolating, they're interjecting their comments in between the earlier texts. And then finally, there's just a third layer that we usually talk about. It's called the anonymous layer. There are many, many statements in the Talmud that are not attributed, not to this rabbi, not to that rabbi, not to any rabbi. And in Hebrew, we call that the stam layer. Stam means anonymous, a samach taf mem. So it's important for you to know those things at the outset, because I'll be referring to the layers of the Talmud. And also, to make it even more clear, my focus this afternoon is going to be on that middle layer, the Amoraic layer of the Talmud. Yes, things begin in the Mishnah, but I think as God heated up and drew my attention, and I got excited about certain discoveries when I was looking at the Amoraic layer. And the last thing I want to say before we move to the texts is that, let me not say, I'll say that a little bit later. I think it's important at this point to begin learning the text, and then I will make my comments as we go on. So text number 1 on page 1, from Yevamot, I called it Taking a Wife for a Day When on the Road. Oh, this text actually became very famous when Ruth Calderon, who used to be an MK in Israel, she was elected to the Knesset for one term. I'm sorry to say, didn't get back in second time round, but she founded an institution, I think it's called Alma, but I may be wrong about that, which teaches Talmud to secular Jews. She felt that it's not just Orthodox Jews in yeshivas who were going to be gripped by the Talmud, but Jewish population at large. This is in Israel. And she wrote a book called A Bride for One Night. And this is a story from the Talmud that she commented on. Now, I'm not going to comment on it the same way that she did. I'm just saying you may have heard of this particular anecdote because she made it famous in that book of hers. All right, I'm going to read it in Hebrew and then comment on it in English. Yater al Kain, Amar Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, Lo yisa Adam isha bimdina zo, v'yelech yisa isha bimdina acheret, shema yizdavku zelazeh v'nimtza ach noseh achoto. So this Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov is a Tana. Now we are looking at Babylonian Talmud right now. This is not a quotation from the Mishnah, but yes, occasionally we do have Tanaitic, these earlier statements do appear in the Babylonian Talmud itself. So what this early rabbi, I'm stressing the word early because the next rabbis that we're going to talk about come quite a lot later. So what this early rabbi is saying is, it's not a good idea for a man to have two wives living in different places who are not aware of each other. And then, he spends some time, let's say, in the province of Judea, and then sometime in the province of the Galil. And he's got two families, two wives, two sets of children, and neither one is aware of the other. Now, why is this Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov opposed to that particular practice? Not because there's sexual impropriety, because in that period of time, a man could have more than one wife. No, what this rabbi is worried about is the children of each of the two wives, but with a common father, will grow up not knowing that they are related to each other, may meet, may fall in love, and may get married. And according to Jewish law, that would be a case of incest. You're not allowed to marry a half sibling. Certainly not allowed to marry either a whole sibling, but not even a half sibling. So he's saying, do not take two wives in different places because what could happen in the future. All right, then I'm reading further, although I left a blank space there. It was just to line up the Hebrew and the English. So the Gemara continues with the following. Ini, that's Aramaic. It literally means in he, kain he. Is that so? Really? Meaning, This is the anonymous voice saying, is it really so what this early rabbi just told us, that you can't have two wives in different places? Vaha, behold, isn't it true that ki ikla v'dar dashir, I left out a word rav, vaha rav, ki ikla v'dar dashir, machriz v'amar, man havaliyoma, Rav Nachman ki ikla l'shech natziv, machriz v'amar, man havya liyoma. All right, so the anonymous voice is citing two very brief anecdotes here. I'm actually calling them one anecdote. Rav, he has a name, Abbaye, but he's just called Rabbi in the Talmud. Rav, he's a first generation post-Mishnaic rabbi. When he visited the town of Dardashir, somewhere in Babylonia, I don't know more than that, he would announce and say, who will be for a day? And what who will be for a day means, who will marry me for a day? Because havya in Hebrew, as well as Aramaic, can mean to get married. It's not the standard verb we use to get married, but that's what he seems to be saying. Who will be with me for a day, really for a night? All right. And Rav Nachman, he's a little bit younger than Rav, what we call him his second generation Babylonian rabbi. You see in the handout, no, you don't see, not in this one, but you will see in the handout things like BA2, BA1, that stands for Babylonian and Mora first generation, Babylonian Mora second generation, but I'm filling in that information for you right now. So Rav Nachman, when he would travel, and let me just tell you, there are many rivers in Babylonia, which is Iraq of today. There was apparently a highly developed ferry boat system. So rabbis were on the road. There's even a book out there by a colleague of mine called Travel in Antiquity. And wherever you look, in the Jerusalem Talmud, Babylonian Talmud, these rabbis are on the move. I don't know if they need to go and answer questions or for commercial purposes. They were also businessmen, but they're on the move a lot. So these two rabbis on the road arrive in a certain town and look for a wife for a night. So please understand, this is different from prostitution. Okay, that's not the point I want to make here, but should you be saying to yourselves, isn't this prostitution? No, it's not, because when a rabbi says who will be a wife for a day, yes, he wants to have sex with her, but he's going to treat her like a wife, which means when he leaves her a day or 2 days later or 1 day later, he will provide, this is according to the rules, don't ask me what these rabbis did, I have no way of knowing. He will provide her with a ketubah payment and so on. And if there's a child, the child will have his name. Possibly, I don't know this for sure, possibly these arrangements by these rabbis were meant to treat women better than otherwise, meaning not just as a prostitute. So, but the question now, getting away from all of that, the early rabbis said, don't do this. Do not have a wife here and a wife there because of what could happen in the future. And then the anonymous voice of the Talmud says, but these two rabbis, these two prominent, yes, Rav and Rav Nachman happen to be prominent in the Babylonian Talmud rabbis. How could you say that you're not supposed to do that? These two rabbis did it, all right? So then the bottom line here is Shani Rabbanan to Pekia Shmaihu. Pekia is like Bikiim, a pay and a bed are interchangeable. So rabbis are in a different category, or I wrote here, rabbis are an exception for people know their names. What that means is if you are Rav or Rav Nachman and you have a wife here and a wife there, the children that you father in both of these places are going to know who their father is because their father is a famous rabbi, a well-known rabbi. And should they then, fortuitously meet each other and consider marriage, right away they will be dissuaded from marriage because they realize that they have a father in common. All right, let me tell you what I'm going to make of this anecdote. So as I say, Ruth Calderon read it from a feminist perspective. I'm reading it from a halachic perspective. So first of all, let me point out that what I wrote in, but what I put in bold letters, both on the Hebrew text side or Aramaic and on the English, those are the anecdotes themselves. The rest of it is introducing the anecdote and so on. What I want to do now is ignore that last line where it says Stam answers, because that's a later layer. And I'm also going to ignore in the middle piece where it says Stam asks, is that so? I'm going to ignore that. I didn't bold it, as you see, it's not part of the story. And now I'm saying, let's just read this little piece of Talmud as it might have looked in the Amoraic period, that's the second layer of the text, prior to the interpolation of the anonymous comments. And it's a very simple thing to figure out now. You have two rules here. The older rabbi in the early period said, don't marry two women in two different places. And then along come these two rabbis, and their message, they're not issuing a law. There's a report about how they behaved. When a rabbi performs a rule, when he carries out a law, that's just as binding on future generations as if he formulated it prescriptively. Descriptive and prescriptive in the Amoraic period are equally valid for future generations. So my point, my very simple point is this. If we just put these two statements side by side, don't do this, don't take two wives, and then we have two rabbis who are saying, perfectly okay. In other words, these two rabbis, each of them has a wife at home, most likely children at home, and each of them on the road is taking a second wife and perhaps fathering children on the road. And it's pretty clear to me, you don't have to agree with me at this point, this is line number one, it's pretty clear to me that these two rabbis are announcing to the Jewish public, when the story got included in the Talmud and got studied, that don't worry about this. In other words, when you're on the road, you talking to men who are on the road, it's okay for you to have sex on the road. Just marry her. Just marry her. Man havli yoma. All right. So they are changing. They are modifying. They are actually, in this case, reversing the older rule. They're saying the older rule, oh, that rabbi is worried about children marrying each other and so on and so on. But we, two rabbis, we are apparently saying, their thinking is, it won't happen. The likelihood of children not knowing who their father is, it's talking about these days, we've got 23andMe, we've got DNA studies. Today, people are not going to wind up marrying their relatives, or if they do, they're going into it rather blindly. But I think these two rabbis are saying, oh, that older rabbi, things were different back then. Today, we have more exchange of information. And I think these two rabbis are saying it's perfectly okay for talking to Jewish men to take a wife on the road. So that is my first example. And it seems to me that if we continue and read the Talmud, ignoring the anonymous comments, we might come away with a different impression of what the major message of the Talmud is. Okay, I'm now going on to text number 2 on the same page. All right, this is a different kind of anecdote. As you can see, this is from a tractate called Moed Katan, which is about the laws of mourning. This is a little bit more complicated to understand, but the point is going to be the same. So we have Amar Abbaye, Amar Rav, Rav Yudah transmitted from his teacher, Avel, a mourner, Yom Rishon Asur Lecho Lechem Mishalo, on the first day of Shiva, of mourning, you should not eat your own food, meaning people should provide you with meals. And as we know, this is pretty standard, that mourners are fed by other people. And then there's a verse here because Mido Marle, Rahman Chazkel, God said to Ezekiel, the lechem anashim lo tochal. I don't want to take the time now, but it's briefly in Ezekiel, he's being told to mourn differently from other people, kind of to draw attention to what he's doing. And he's being told here, don't eat the bread of men. And this rabbi, Rav, is saying, oh, a typical mourner should eat the bread of men, meaning other people's bread when you're in mourning. First day is what he's talking about, and not your own bread. The verse from which they derive it doesn't have to tell the whole story. There's you can learn something from that verse. It's kind of neat what they're doing here. But that's the rule. That's what I want to emphasize. Do not eat your own food on the first day of mourning. Other people should feed you. And then we get a 6-word anecdote. Rabba v'Rav Yosef, Marley Face udatayhu lahadade. Okay, Rabba and Rav Yosef, as you can see, the English side, are 3rd generation Babylonian rabbis. They are generally considered to be competitors of each other. I don't know, I can't comment on that. I'm not so sure that's exactly right. But be that as it may, it says here that when they were in mourning, they exchanged meals with each other. All right, so your first impression is, isn't that nice? The earlier rabbi, Rav, And by the way, the person who transmitted him, the second generation, that's how it works. Second generation transmits first generation teaching. Rav said, let other people feed you. Other people should feed you, at least on the first day of mourning. And look, these two rabbis exchanged morning meals, meaning when Rabbah was in mourning, Rav Yosef sent him morning food. And when Rav Yosef was in mourning, Rabbah sent him morning food. It's not simultaneous. They're not exchanging the meals simultaneously. There's no reason to think that they're both in mourning at the same time. So you say to yourself, how sweet, how pious, what great role models. They took care of each other. Maybe if they were antagonistic to each other, this is a way of showing when they're in mourning that they have friendly feelings. You know, how you can look at it however you want to look at it. I'm going to say something else. This is much simpler than text number 1, because here we do not have any comments, later comments by the anonymous voice. What I'm going to say is the following. That very brief anecdote is not coming here just to tell me that they carried out a teaching of an early rabbi. It's telling me something else. Okay, and I'm going to try to say this as clearly as I can. To provide a meal to somebody else when that person is in mourning is an act of kindness, meaning you give of yourself, you pay for the food. In other words, it's in your pantry, you cook a chicken and you bring it over. You don't say to the other person, I just paid $13 for this, you can pay me after Shiva. No, it's a gift. That's what we're being told here. But when these rabbis exchanged morning meals, what the commentators explain is they agreed apparently in advance. That seems to be the what's going on here. They basically said to each other, we'll take care of each other when we're in mourning. And then you say to yourself, you know, if Rabbah sends Rav Yosef a meal when Rav Yosef is in mourning and expects Rav Yosef to give him a meal, to give Rabbah a meal when Rabbah is in mourning, well, isn't Rabbah in a sense, which one of them? They're paying for their own meals. Let me make sure I'm going to get this right. If he is sending a meal, yes, if Rabbah is sending a meal to Rav Yosef with the expectation that when Rabbah himself is in mourning, he receives a meal from Rav Yosef, you could say he is paying actually in advance for the morning meal that he will receive. But the point here is, can you really consider this arrangement as other people feeding the mourners? Or is this an arrangement where a mourner is just paying in advance for a meal that he's going to receive later on, and the way in which he's paying for it is giving somebody else a meal? Well, that is a real argument against what Rabbah and Rav Yosef, it's a possible argument against what Rabbah and Rav Yosef did. And what I am saying is the point of this anecdote is to tell you it's okay. The editor of the Talmud included this particular line. The two rabbis exchanged morning meals. He included that line in order to inform the audience of the Talmud that the rule is you don't feed yourself on the first day of mourning. But if you want to enter into this kind of arrangement with somebody else, that you exchange morning meals, that's okay. You're still within the limits of law. It's a borderline case, okay? Because, when you sit Shiva, the last thing you want to think about is somebody else's morning meal that I'm going to, the last thing you think about is, did I pay him or didn't I pay him? And does he owe the meal? Does he not owe me a meal? You don't want to think about that. But these two rabbis, the anecdote, this very brief anecdote is in there in the Talmud in order to make it clear to the audience of the Talmud, let other people feed you, even if this is the kind of arrangement you want to make, it qualifies as other people feeding you. There's, you can make the argument against it, but somebody here decided, I cannot tell you whoever it is that put this line into the Talmud, or these two rabbis themselves made what they were doing clear to everybody. So the report of what they did got into the Talmud, and that's their way of communicating to future generations. This too is okay. Let me just say one more thing, and then we're going to stop the Q&A. the identical statement, the identical words, machlefei seudatayhu lahadade. By the way, that's Aramaic, but you can see the Hebrew right in there. Machlefim seudotehem lahadade is with each other, or exchange meals with each other. So that exact same statement, different rabbis, that exact same statement appears in Masachet Megillah, which is about Purim. It says that these two, it's actually brothers, exchanged Purim meals with each other. And you say, big deal. Why is somebody including in the Talmud this detail that these two exchanged Purim meals? And it's just like this. You see, there are two mitzvot on Purim. There are more than two, but there are two mitzvot on Purim. One is to eat a Purim meal, Seudat Purim, and the other is to give Purim gifts, Mishloach Manot. And what you're supposed to give for Mishloach Manot is food that's ready to eat. So when these two brothers exchanged Purim meals, what the Talmud is telling us, when they each sent a Purim meal to the other, it counts as two Purim mitzvot. The meal that each sent to the other counts as a Purim meal and as Mishloach Manot, as a Purim gift. So it's like 2 for 1. They were able to perform 2 mitzvot with 1 act. Why would they do that? It's a little bit hard for me to answer that question, but one thing is pretty obvious to me is you save a lot of money, okay? Because Purim gifts can add up, Purim meal can be expensive. So if you do it like this, if you exchange it, then each of you gets to eat a wonderful, tasty, beautifully prepared Purim meal, which for both of you counts as a Purim meal and a gift of Mishloach Manot, a Purim gift. Okay, I'm happy to answer questions if there are any.
Oh, there are lots of questions. Hi, I'm Ellie. I'm the Director of Digital Learning, and I'm excited to be here today. There are so many questions around the logistics of the first story, as I'm sure you were clear there are going to be. You know, what happens to the wife? Does she get a get? Are they supported? You know, how many wives did these people have? You know, it was this like every town. And it really does kind of make you feel like the traveling salesman of the, you know, 1930, when you'd hear those stories about they have all of these. That's where my mind went. But can you give us a little bit more on the logistics of how this bride for one day worked in the ancient world?
Yeah, I now remembered. I'm going to give you the logistics to the extent that I can in a moment, but there was something I meant to say that I forgot to say, and it is the following. And yes, when we removed the anonymous layer from the text, the message of those two rabbis was all men have the right to behave like this when on the road. I'm not sure I said that as well as I should have. In other words, when the anonymous voice came along, it limited that kind of behavior. This is very ironic. Only rabbis, according to the anonymous voice of the text, can have sex on the road. No other men are allowed to. And I find that unbelievably ironic because it should be the reverse. It's like, oh yes, men, you men, we know, okay, you can satisfy. But rabbis, we want rabbis to be on a pedestal. Just the opposite. That short anecdote is saying in the Amoraic layer, all men, these two rabbis are saying, we are modeling behavior for all men. Jewish men, you can do this. And then the Stam says, no, you can't, always can. Okay, logistics. I can't really say too much about logistics, but what I can say, because you asked a number of interesting questions there, if you're marrying somebody, there's going to be a ketubah. If you're going to divorce her because you're not going to live with her, then yes, she is your wife. If she wants to marry somebody else who actually is going to be a companion to her and not just a one-night stand, then she has to have a get. She can't, according to Jewish law, go on and marry a second husband unless she receives a get. Is he supposed to support her? Yes, he is supposed to support her. You know, you might be saying to yourselves now, well, what man would be stupid enough to do that rather than have a one-night stand with a prostitute? I can't, that's the question I cannot answer for you. But these rabbis are saying, when you're on the road, if you're going to have sex on the road, then do it in the following way. And I will try to make the following statement, but I can be disagreed with. the rabbis who are saying this to men in general may be saying, this is really better for women because their reputation won't be sullied. You're going to be their husband. Should they get pregnant on the one night stand, that child will have a father, let alone a famous father. That woman, if she wants to get divorced, will be properly severed from you so that her second marriage is not adulterous marriage, and so on and so on. So the logistics are, according to the book, according to the Talmud, she is a wife like any other wife with the privileges and the responsibilities that come along with it. That's about all I can say. By the way,
I think that's like, there was just a firestorm of like every sort of like, but tell me how this, and I think, probably if Bravo existed, then we would have like the Real Housewives of the Babylonian Talmud or something.
yes. Yes.
So in terms of our second story, there's a sense of, it's not how we like to see the idea of a meal of condolence. We like this idea of a meal of condolence being something that's communal and is coming from this place of love. And both the idea that you're presenting within both the poor meals and the morning meals is that it's very obligatory and that this is a check mark. And in some ways, it's taking this kind of sense of intent of being part of the warmth of the Jewish community in a time of tragedy, and it's making it a quid pro quo.
Well, the pity is that the anecdote is only 6 words long, and I have no idea of why these rabbis did it, or what were the circumstances. For the Purim part of it, I really think they did it to save money. They are brothers, and by exchanging meals, chances are each one prepared a lovely meal, and by giving it to each other, they doubly, they got credit for 2 Purim mitzvot. I think that one is easier, and they're brothers as it happens. Coming back to the first, the Rabbi and Rav Yosef, here too, I can't really fill in the context. It's hard for me to say that was about saving money. I'm going to guess that since Rabbi and Rav Yosef, like the famous pair Rava and Abbaye, or like the famous pair Rav and Shmuel, maybe less famous than the first generation, maybe this was a way of showing at a time of need that, well, we often disagree and we may be hostile to each other, but I'm going to take care of you when you're in mourning, and okay, and I expect you to, the deal is I'll take care of you and you take care of me, quid pro quo. That is, I can't deny that there's a quid pro quo there. But I think had there been more context, we could have looked upon it more positively. But I just want to say the following: please do not let that take away from the halachic point that I am trying to make, that this second story is not so much changing halacha, not modifying it, not adjusting it, but it is answering a question that was likely to arise, meaning how far does this go, having other people feed me? By the way, in terms of the Jewish community, this particular rule did not become the way Jews behave. Okay, what Jews behave, the way Jews have behaved for centuries and to this very day is we take care of the mourner, usually not just on the first day, but throughout the period of Shiva. We provide meals, we provide comfort, we show up, we take care of things. There's a lot of love, there's a lot of concern given by the Jewish community to the mourner. So I just want you people today here, just look at this as this is a legal arrangement. And the point is, it's not just a little story about rabbis performing the law the way they were told on the first day, you don't eat your own food. It's really answering a question that wasn't explicitly asked, but it's giving an answer. And by the way, the Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law, approved of this arrangement, but it said you may not technically do it in advance. In other words, not years before. In other words, when you come into mourning, that's when you can say to somebody, send me a meal and I'll send you a meal. So in a way, the question you asked me, Ellie, you and Rav Yosef Karo are on the same page. He apparently felt that this is too indifferent, not enough love and community.
It's not every day I get compared to Rav Yosef Karo. I think that one of the things, and I think just in the spirit of trying to get to all 6 stories, I think we should probably move on. But I know this question is going to come up again, and I'm guessing that this will follow, that at the end, this is going to be the big reveal. Why would the editors of the Talmud include these at all? And I don't know if that's probably a pervasive question throughout. These are, such kind of asides. Why these stories? Why what's new, as they say?
I'm going to choose to postpone answering that because we've got 3 or 4 more anecdotes, time allowing, and I will directly head on answer that.
I'll make sure I hold on to that one.
Yes.
So let's move on to number 4. And you guys, these were amazing questions. Keep them coming. Oh, 3, sorry, 3.
Yes. Okay, as soon as it's up on screen, I will read it. Okay, it's number 3 on page 2. Okay, so there's no real context that I have to fill you in here. This is going to be a little different from the previous 2 because we have a visitor from Israel spending Shabbat with a rabbi colleague in Babylonia. And let me read the story and then we'll say more. Ula ikla levei Rav Menashe. So Ula is one of those people that traveled back and forth from the land of Israel to Babylonia and back, and he would transmit teachings in both directions. So ikla, kuf lamed ayin, it happens to be Hebrew as well as Aramaic, means to drop in. It's kind of to throw yourself down, but I'm just calling it, he visited. Ula visited the home of Rav Menashe. Rav Menashe does not figure in the story, but he happens to be the host of this visiting Ula from the land of Israel. Atahahu Gavra Taraf Ababa. This is Aramaic. Came this man and knocked Taraf. He knocked on the Bava. Bava means gate, but it also means door. Now, I don't know if it means like the door of my apartment. It more likely means that there's, a gate around the property, or maybe even a gate around the town. It's hard for me to say. That particular detail doesn't matter. So somebody is knocking on a door on Shabbat. Amar and Ula is visiting Rav Menashe, and Ula hears this visitor knocking on the door on Shabbat. And Ula says, Amar, that's Ula says, Man hai, who is this? Okay, litchal gufe de kamachile l'shapta. Let his body, gufe, his body be desecrated because he has desecrated the Sabbath. Now, what is getting Ula's goat? Ula clearly, in his land of Israel understanding of Jewish law, thinks that knocking on a door, making noise on Shabbat is not allowed. And he's so incensed when he visits Babylonia that somebody shows up at the home of a rabbi. I don't think it matters whose home, but yes, at the home of Rav Menashe, somebody knocks on the door and this ticks off Ula. He clearly is not an easy person to deal with. He doesn't ask any questions. He just says, who is this? Doesn't wait for an answer and says, may the guy sort of drop dead. That's what he's saying, may the guy drop dead. Marley Robber, this is the same Rabba from anecdote number 2, but here he's without Rav Yosef. So Rabba, who apparently, I have to deduce this from the text, we've got the home of Rav Menashe. Rav Menashe does not make an appearance. We have a visitor named Ula who carries on. And then we have Rabba, a Babylonian rabbi. They're both 3rd generation rabbis. Rabba, a local Babylonian rabbi, who apparently was also there at the moment in the home of Rav Menashe. Rabba says to Ula, Lo asru ela kol shel shir. The only prohibition of making sounds or noise on Shabbat is the sound of, I'd like to do the sound of music. What did I write here? Prohibited musical sounds. Okay, I like to say what you're not allowed to do on Shabbat, according to Rabba, is produce the sound of music. Meaning, we've got a major disagreement here between Rabba and Ula. Ula saying, no knocking on the door on Shabbat, and Rabba saying, oh, no. We in Babylonia, we know about not producing sounds, making noise on the Sabbath, but we in Babylonia, we prohibit playing musical instruments on the Sabbath. There actually are many other discussions of playing musical instruments, but here we're talking about producing sounds on the Sabbath. And Rabba saying, we in Babylonia, we knock on doors, okay? we probably clap our hands, we bang the table. But what we don't do in Babylonia on Shabbat, that is play musical instruments. So he's putting Ula in his place. I think he's clearly very offended that Ula, without knowing anything further, is already saying about somebody, you should no longer be allowed to live. So what do I think is going on in this particular anecdote? All right, this anecdote is probably a little more, has more steps to it than the two that we've looked at earlier. So here we have a clash between the practices, the Sabbath practices of the land of Israel and the Sabbath practices of Babylonia. You can see that there's tension here because Ula didn't have to go as far as he did in saying drop dead. And Rabbah seems calm. That's all I can say. I can't tell you more about his answer, but he clearly is saying to Ula, that's what you do in your land, in your cities on the Sabbath. Here, we're more lenient in Babylonia. Now, I just want to say the following. I tried to look up in the Talmud a statement that making noise on Shabbat is not allowed. Such a statement does exist in the Jerusalem Talmud. That's the Talmud coming out of the land of Israel. There is no such statement prior to the time of Rabbah in the Babylonian Talmud. So now I'm going to speculate. I can't prove this. It seems to me that what's happening in this anecdote is that Rabbah is saying to Ula, you want to behave stringently on the Sabbath and not even let people knock on doors, fine. But we in Babylonia have taken that well-known ban on producing sounds on the Sabbath, and we have interpreted it leniently. We think in Babylonia, here in Babylonia, we think what you can't do on the Sabbath is play a musical instrument. Aside from that, everything is allowed. And that's the end of the anecdote. So what I'm taking away from this anecdote as it's presented in the Talmud, I have a feeling that you would not ask me why the editor of the Talmud included this anecdote, because this anecdote, I think, is easier to grasp the point. The point is, first of all, tension between the two schools of rabbis, and people have written about this, people have researched this. There clearly was tension between the rabbis in the land of Israel and the rabbis in the land of Babylonia. But putting that aside, I think what we have here is Rabbah, maybe because he's angry or annoyed at the statement, or maybe not, I can't say that for sure. Rabbah saying, well, yes, we don't make noise on the Sabbath, but but we do make certain kinds. There's certain kinds of off-limit noises that we don't make on the Sabbath, and those are playing musical instruments. And the other kind of noise, you want to sit at your Shabbos table and go like this. Is a story in the Yerushalmi that Talmud of land of Israel, that two rabbis were sitting and singing on Shabbat, and they were, today this happens too. You just accompany your singing with clapping on the table, and the rabbis in the Talmud Yerushalmi, some approved, some disapproved, and so on. But here, Rabbah is saying, here in Babylonia, we have interpreted the law more leniently. So it seems to me clear that this anecdote was included in the Talmud to tell you about that development towards leniency. I'm going to go on to the next one, number 4, which is on the same page, but it's called number 4. All right. This is about Yom Kippur, and it's a very famous Mishnah. There are 5 prohibited activities on Yom Kippur. I'll read them. Yom Kippur Asur, Yom Kippur, one is prohibited. Achila u'shtiya, that's 2 words, but it's one prohibition. No eating or drinking, that's number 1. No richitza, that's no bathing for pleasure. Sicha, no anointing the body with oil. Maybe that's not something we are so familiar with around here. Number 4, ni'ilat sandal, no wearing sandals. But let me make clear right now that in the ancient world, or in the ancient Israel, sandals and shoes were interchangeable in all our halachic texts. A sandal has a sole made of leather, and it's attached to the foot, usually by leather straps. And a shoe is like a sandal, but it's closed. It has a leather sole, let's say, but then it has an upper, I don't know, but it has an upper. Maybe that's what it's called. It's called afanta in Hebrew. I actually don't know the English word for it. So what the Mishnah is telling us is, okay, I'm going to put it in my words now. No wearing shoes or sandals on Yom Kippur means you're supposed to go barefoot. And let me just say right now that going barefoot when you are in mourning is an ancient Jewish practice testified to in the Bible. When King David's son Avshalom died, it said the king went yachef. Yachef is the Hebrew word for barefoot, as he ascended the Mount of Olives. In that exact same verse in Ezekiel that we looked at before, when Ezekiel is told somebody's going to die, but you're not to mourn, he's told, keep your shoes on, na'alechem beraglechem, keep your shoes on, meaning a mourner takes off his shoes, meaning a mourner goes barefoot. All right, and then the last of the 5 prohibitions on Yom Kippur is tashmish hamita, which is sexual relations. Okay, this is very straightforward. And then there are 4 little anecdotes here. Each line in bold is a separate anecdote. Rav Yehuda, I will, since the Aramaic here are even words that are not part of my own Aramaic vocabulary, I'm just going to read these in English. Rav Judah went forth in footgear, meaning on Yom Kippur, of reeds. The next Rabbi Abbaye, extremely well known, but so was Rav Yehuda well known. On Yom Kippur, he wore footgear made of palm branches. Rava Nafik, okay, and Rava and Abbaye, same generation and colleagues. Rava wore twisted reeds on his feet on Yom Kippur. And the last one, this is a little bit out of chronological order, but it's the longest line. And that's another way in which the Talmud organizes its material. If there are 4 anecdotes and one of them is much longer than the other, here we're counting words, then you put that one last, even though that rabbi lived earlier than Abbaye and Rava. So Rabbi Bar Rav Huna, he tied a piece of cloth around his legs and went out on Yom Kippur. So what is going on here? All right. The Mishnah, to my mind, is saying extremely clearly, you are required to go out barefoot. See, the Mishnah is expressing itself in negative terms. Do not eat, do not bathe, do not anoint, do not have sex, do not wear shoes. But do not wear shoes is actually positively, it could have been formulated positively, but for good style, you keep them all in the same kind of formulation. So the Mishnah is really saying, at home is whatever you do at home, you do at home. But when you go outside on Yom Kippur, barefoot, because Yom Kippur, the rituals of Yom Kippur are somewhat similar to the rituals of mourning. When we mourn, we don't fast, but we do go barefoot, so to speak, and so on. So what's going on here? And my understanding of what's going on here is as follows. Let me try to give you 2 possible interpretations. I'll give you the other one first and then my own. The other interpretation is, oh, you know what the Mishnah is really saying? No leather on your feet on Yom Kippur, not leather shoes, not leather sandals. But if it's not made of leather, perfectly okay on Yom Kippur. And look at these rabbis, they avoided leather, reeds, and what else is here? Cloth, palm branches, and so on. And I'm saying that is the, it doesn't say that anywhere here. Nowhere in the Talmud does it say, oh, it's leather that the Mishnah is telling you not to put on your feet. And what the Mishnah means is anything else is okay. No, I'm saying the Mishnah, and I can back this up with commentators, the Mishnah is saying you have to go barefoot. The Mishnah, was ended in the year 200 Common Era, and the Mishnah was written, or I shouldn't say written, Mishnah came out was published orally in the land of Israel. We are now moving a couple of hundred years later, 3rd century, 4th century in Babylonia. And these rabbis, it seems to me, are saying, well, I would say the same thing. I'm not going to be caught dead going barefoot in the streets on Yom Kippur or going to shul. That's not what I would do. Am I perfectly comfortable wearing my sneakers on Yom Kippur? By the way, it's such a bad example because everybody's wearing sneakers all the time now. But years ago, when people went to shul, let's say women were going to shul in leather high heels, okay, even on Yom Kippur, would I feel embarrassed to go in sneakers? Probably not, but I may feel, just a little uncomfortable because everybody else is dressed so much more nicely. What I think these rabbis were saying is, we are not going to go out barefoot. In our society, they are saying, who goes barefoot? Slaves, poor people. it's just not socially acceptable to go outside barefoot. By the way, in the ancient world, slaves didn't even have clothing. Slaves went naked, all right? So no self-respecting person would go naked in public, for more reasons than one, but certainly not to be thought of as not to be confused with a slave. So what I think is going on here is that these rabbis read the Mishnah. I think they understood full well that the Mishnah is saying, you are supposed to go barefoot on Yom Kippur. And these rabbis are saying to themselves over the generations, this is not something that we rabbis do. We don't go out barefoot. Again, what you want to do in your own home is separate. We don't go out barefoot. We don't go in public. It would be so undignified of us, wearing, I don't know, rabbinic robes, rabbinic turban, and so on, and then to go barefoot. So they said, we will develop footgear that we could still say about ourselves, we're going barefoot. So if Rav Judah wore a footgear, I deliberately avoided using the word shoe. It just says in the Aramaic, nafi kuyatsa b'dahitne, and dahitne means reeds. Again, it's not part of my basic vocabulary in Aramaic. Rabbi Judah went forth covering his feet with reeds. And these other rabbis, they all covered their feet, all right? And I think they said to themselves, oh, I know if I just wear reeds on Yom Kippur, I'm still going barefoot. In their own heads, they're probably saying to themselves, what the Mishnah is talking about is like real shoes made of leather, or real sandals, doesn't matter, one or the other, made of leather. But the Mishnah is saying more than that. The Mishnah is saying go barefoot, but these rabbis are saying, we're not going to go barefoot, but we're not going to wear leather shoes either, because those are like what we do every day. We're going to behave differently on Yom Kippur. We're not going to go out barefoot because of our social standards and personal respectability and dignity, but we'll cover our feet. In other words, we are still considering ourselves as fulfilling the Mishnah's rule of going barefoot, even if we cover our feet with reeds or palm branches or twisted reeds or a piece of cloth. So to my mind, these rabbis are doing something remarkable. They are interpreting a Mishnah in a way, by the way, leniency is a word I haven't used yet, but in all 6 anecdotes that we'll be looking at today, we are encountering changes made by rabbis in the Gemara with regard to earlier teachings. In this case, it's a Mishnaic teaching. The rabbis in the Gemara are moving in a lenient direction. I'm not going to say today that all rabbis in the Talmud, when they introduce changes, it was always in the direction of leniency. But I am willing to say 80% of the changes made by Amoraim with regard to earlier rules, 80% of them are in the direction of leniency. And if you think that suits me just fine, yes, it suits me just fine. I'm very pleased that not only do we see changes, but that we see changes in the direction of leniency. So I think we can now take some questions. I have half an hour to go, and we may be able to do 5 and 6.
Oh, there's so many questions, but I think there's something truly radical that you're introducing here. When you started this session, you said that these sorts of stories were used often to show the kind of piety and the way in which they followed the laws. And your theory here is, no, actually, this is a way of saying laws are meant to be changed, or laws are there, but there's flexible. One person saying, is this the Amoraim approach, is it the opposite of the fence around the Torah? Instead of saying, oh, we need to be more and more careful that, hey, maybe there could be some chinks in that fence, and that maybe we need to get around that.
That is exactly right. I'm so happy that you extrapolated when I was talking about exactly what I was hoping you would extrapolate. Yes, I am making the case that the understanding of these small anecdotes as rabbis modeling religious behavior, pious behavior, I'm saying that's not why the editors of the Talmud chose to include these in this document, which we generally think of, as I mentioned, with the economy of language. No, I am saying that the editors of the Talmud are trying to tell us that when rabbis carry out the law, and they carried it out differently, and the way in which they did it differently, they modified it, they changed it. when a record of how they behaved, again, it's a past tense, they did it. They didn't just talk about it at the future, but they already behaved that way. That is a message embedded in the Amoraic layer of the Talmud, not so much in the anonymous layer, but I'm looking at the Amoraic layer of the Talmud, and the Amoraic layer of the Talmud is saying, yes, laws are produced, shall we say, in 200 Common Era, 250, 300 Common Era, but a rabbi living 50 or 100 years later who discovers, and my last case is like just social conditions, I can't think of a religious reason why you have to cover your feet, why rabbis were uncomfortable going barefoot on Yom Kippur and decided to cover their feet. I can only think of a social argument. I can't even think of an economic argument either, because, well, you could say it's cheaper to use palm branches than leather shoes, fine, but I don't think that's the point there. So yes, I am saying that the editors of the Talmud have slipped into the Talmud with these anecdotes, what maybe you'll allow me to call a subversive message, that laws are promulgated, laws are decided, laws are on the books. Yes, and in every legal system out there today, religious system or secular system, laws, we have a Constitution of the United States with amendments, laws are put out there for the time and place in which people wrote those laws. And then when situations change, there are mechanisms for changing the law. By the way, I'm certainly not the first person to say that in the discussions of law in the Talmud, see, I'm talking about anecdotes, but laws are prescriptive. Yes, of course, I will frankly admit that in the discussions of prescriptive laws in the Talmud, you can see arguments moving towards leniency or moving towards change over time. But what I don't think anybody has noticed, I believe I'm the first, maybe I'll find out, I'll be disabused of that notion after my book comes out, but I happen to think I'm the first. Let me just talk a little bit more about my approach here. What I have been engaged in is what's called a horizontal reading of the Talmud rather than a linear reading. See, of course, we read the Talmud literally. We go from line 1 to line 2 to line 3 and so on. These little anecdotes, they appear every couple of pages. They're not, Talmud is not full of these anecdotes. You know, if you had asked me how many are there in the entire Talmud, I haven't read all of them. I haven't commented on all of them. I'm going to say they number in the thousands, you know, not 10,000, maybe 2,000, maybe 3,000. They're short. Some are a little bit longer, but some of them are very, very short. So all I'm saying is that there's a message in these descriptive performance reports of rabbis' behaviors. And it's usually the students who report on the rabbi's behavior. See, you don't get first person here. It's like somebody said, this rabbi put palm branches on his foot. Well, the rabbi is not talking to us in first person. It's a student of his, maybe a colleague, but more likely a student. It was the job of students, people have written about this, not me, to engage their rabbis, their rabbinic teachers, their masters, engage them in give and take on the rules that these rabbis were promulgating, that rabbis were teaching. And it was actually the job of students to challenge the rabbi, to say, but it says over there something different from what you're saying. Don't you think you're wrong? And the rabbi would have to justify. But these anecdotes most likely are coming to us from the mouths of students who are telling us, here's what my rabbi teacher, how he behaved on Yom Kippur, and I think we can learn something from it. Okay, did his rabbi teacher say, you don't have to go barefoot on Yom Kippur, you can cover your feet with palm branches? No, but he modeled it in his behavior and teaching us two things, that this is allowed and that this is how the law can change.
We had a lot of questions about music. As you can imagine, first of all, there's some sense, you know, the Levites would perform, or yes, there is music in the temple. When does the prohibition come in about no music on the Sabbath? And also, there is a translation question. In the Hebrew, it's kol shel shir, so it's a voice of singing. how does that become musical instruments as opposed to singing? And then in contemporary services, there are a number of conservative synagogues that do actually use, when we talk about leniency and adaptation, use musical instruments on Shabbat. How has that evolved? Or do you know if there's a sense? So that's a huge question. I'm going to throw them all out there and you see what you want to pick up.
Yes. I don't think I'm going to address the last part about conservative
Have a
synagogues,
feeling.
because we're here today to discuss trends in the Talmud. Okay, the other piece I can answer quickly, shir has a broader meaning in the Talmud than just song. Even today, shir means poetry and so on. So shir in the Talmud means music, and kol shel shir is, as I like to say, sound of music. It is true, since people are, as I gather now, very interested in this ban on musical instruments, playing musical instruments on Shabbat. It is referred to here, it was very clearly referred to here. You know, the only thing that's not allowed, says that Rabbi, is kol shel shir. But the famous place where there is a ban on playing musical instruments is actually in Masachet Beitzah. That's the rules of Jewish festivals. In chapter 5, Mishnah 2 in Masachet Beitzah, it says there are things that we don't do, lumping together the festivals and the Sabbath. Festivals and Sabbath are very similar, but you can cook on the festivals, one or two other things. Otherwise, there are, similar prohibitions. It says there that a shvut violation, now shvut is like the word Shabbat, it's shin bet vav taf. It means cessation of work, the way Shabbat means cessation. So it says there in that Mishnah, which is a very famous Mishnah, that we don't play instruments on Shabbat or on Yom Tov. The exact wording escapes me at the moment. But then in the Gemara's comment, it says Shema Yitakein. And this is what people generally hear about. Why don't we play musical instruments on Shabbat? There's nothing wrong with the playing itself of the musical instrument. It's less when you play that stringed instrument, that a string snaps and that you come to fix it on Shabbat because you've already started playing and you've got to finish what you're doing. By the way, that does sort of answer the question about the conservative synagogues. As long as the music that you're gonna, I'm not, please don't regard me as an official decider right now. I'm just saying it's likely that when the Committee on Jewish Law and Standards, which I now happen to be a member of, but back then I wasn't, when they allowed synagogues who chose to use musical instruments on Shabbat, they most likely said, but if it breaks, there's no fixing it on Shabbat, because that is a separate ban on Shabbat to repair. We don't repair things on Shabbat. So I can't tell you enough about the musical instruments in the ancient world. We see them here and there, and King David had David's harp, whatever. But that was the argument put forward for not playing musical instruments on Shabbat, and period. So when Rabbah says we don't play musical instruments on Shabbat, he's talking about his generation in the land of Babylonia. And as I say, elsewhere in the Talmud, they agree with Rabbah. Yes, they agree with Rabbah, and they say no musical instruments on Shabbat, no playing them on Shabbat, lest you come to repair something that breaks in the musical instrument. So that really gives an opening today to be able to change the law, but I'm staying away from today. Okay, I think
we should keep going, but you are this. Keep it coming. These are great.
Yes. Okay. I think, Tanya, we're going to go to number 6 now because there's only 20 minutes, and 5 would take up all 20 minutes, and 6 is too important to me. By the way, I always like to put up more material than I can cover, because to put up less and to wind up with half an hour with nothing to say, that would be a lot worse. So in this last example, there are 3 parts, 6.1, 6.2, and 6.3. There are 3 related anecdotes, and this should not be hard for me to explain. We're talking about reciting Kiddush on Friday night, and Shmuel, he happens to be a colleague of Rav. We haven't seen Shmuel today, and Shmuel says, Ein Kiddush el b'makom seudah. Shmuel is consistent with his own rule, but that relates to the previous couple of lines. Let's not talk about that now. Shmuel issues a statement that on Friday night, when you have your Shabbat meal, you recite Kiddush at the meal. All right, I'm going to skip the next two lines because we don't need them. I'm going to the third section of this same box. Amar Laho Rab Anan Bar Tachlifa. This is a student of Samuel, as you will see in a moment. Here's the anecdote. Zimnin Sagin, many times, Haba Ka'imna Kamei Shmuel. I was standing before Samuel. Samuel is his teacher and he's a student, and it seems that students were expected in lieu of tuition. And this has been written about by people. In lieu of tuition, they would help serve. They would do household chores. They would assist in the kitchen. They would assist with the meals, serving the meals. So he says here, many times I was standing before Samuel, the Nachit me Igra Ara, and he came down from the roof to the land, meaning the roof is, on the top of the building, and Ara is ground floor, the Hadar Mekadesh, and recite Kiddush again. So I have to fill in the details, but they're pretty clear. Meaning, it's hot in Babylonia, hot summers, and apparently Shmuel thought he was going to eat on the roof. People slept on the roofs. We learned that from the Talmud. It's true today in Iraq. I have read that to get away from the oppressive heat in the house. So you go up to the roof. So what happened was Shmuel apparently was going to eat on the roof, and he made Kiddush. He recited Kiddush at his, I don't know if it's table or he's sitting on cushions, however they ate in those days. He recites Kiddush on the roof. And then he decides, for reasons which are not made clear, to go down to the ground floor to have his Sabbath meal. And when he approaches, I'll call it the table, when he goes over to his Sabbath table on the ground floor, he'd already recited Kiddush on the roof. Hadar Mekadesh, Choser Mekadesh, he repeated Kiddush. So his student who observes this behavior, Rav Anan bar Tachlifa, reports that this is what Samuel did. So we can deduce from here, very legitimately, that when Samuel's principle, when he enunciated his principle, you recite Kiddush where you're going to eat, he doesn't just mean in the same house where you're going to have your meal. So if you recite Kiddush on the roof and then you go downstairs to have your meal, you don't have to repeat Kiddush. It's okay. It's in the same house. No. Shmuel intends, this, by the way, is not a leniency. It's a stringency. Shmuel was saying, if you thought you were going to eat there, but I don't know, a wind came or rain started to drizzle, whatever, if you move inside, you repeat Kiddush, because Kiddush has to be exactly where you're going to eat your Sabbath meal, not just in general vicinity, like in the house. You have to recite Kiddush at your Shabbat table. By the way, table is a little bit anachronistic, but I'm going to use that word now, because I think tables, sitting at chairs at tables came later. So, that was anecdote number 1. Now I'm going down to 6.2. It'll come up on screen. We've got to raise 6. There we go. V'af Rav Huna sabar ein kiddush el b'makom suda. Rav Huna is next generation. Shmuel is Babylonian Morah, the first generation. Rav Huna is Babylonian Morah, the second generation. And okay, this is a narrator, an anonymous narrator saying, Rav Huna also agrees or holds the same principle as Shmuel, that Kiddush has to be recited precisely where you eat. Now, I'm going to ignore that comment. That's not the anecdote. So here comes the anecdote. Rav Huna Kaddish. Okay, Rav Huna recited Kiddush, presumably at the table, because his predecessor has already established Kiddush at the table. Again, I say table is anachronistic. The Akrale Shraga, and the Shraga, the lamp, what did I write in English here? Oh, just lamp. Okay, Shraga is, they didn't have electric lamps. They had something big, torch, whatever. And the lamp, it overturned, it went out. You can't eat in the dark. In my apartment, even if all my lights went out, unless there were a blackout in New York City, I would have enough ambient light coming in from the street that I could definitely eat a Shabbat meal at my Shabbat table in the dark, but they couldn't. So Rav Huna, he's hungry. He wants to eat his Shabbat meal. They, meaning not Rav Huna himself, his students, his staff, they bring up the money, the utensils, meaning the platters of food, levei ganane de Rav Abbaye. They took the platters of food. I guess they could somehow figure them out in the dark, or this rabbi is determined not to eat in the dark. And he has his people, including the students, bring his platters of food up to, because it says Ile. Well, Ile can mean they're brought up or they're brought in, one way or another. They bring it to his son's chambers. Beganana is like the bedroom or the sleeping chambers, the chambers of the son, to have a shraga where there was light. So now Rav Huna can sit down and have the Sabbath meal. But what does Rav Huna do? Kaddish, he repeats Kiddush, okay, because his first Kiddush was not followed by a meal. So now he recites Kiddush in his son's chambers. The ta'im midei, and this is the interesting detail, and he tastes midi. A midi means a small thing. He has a snack. He doesn't eat a full meal. Now, if my children don't live near me, but if I kind of barged in on a friend or a child of mine because my light went out and I wanted to have the Sabbath meal, I think I'd feel pretty uncomfortable saying, you thought you were going to eat alone tonight, you and your family, just the 3 or 4 or 5 of you. Well, I'm here too, and now I'm going to be here for hours. Well, Rav Huna apparently has the good sense to say, okay, there's a rule that you have to say Kiddush at the meal. So I am going to repeat Kiddush, but hey, son, Rabbah, I am not going to impose on you now. I'm just going to eat a little something, and then I'm going to leave. Apparently, he's going to go hungry. But there is an important principle or detail of Jewish law emerging from this anecdote. We thought up until now that you had to recite Kiddush where you eat your Sabbath meal. And this rabbi is reciting Kiddush where he's having a Sabbath snack, and he's regarding eating a little something as fulfilling Shmuel's rule of reciting Kiddush where you have your Shabbat meal. So I'm totally captivated by this anecdote. I think I see here a sensitive father who understands that he's not exactly welcome to barge in on his son on Friday night. And he says, but look, I have to have Kiddush where I eat. So hear me out. I'm reciting Kiddush. I'm just you want to offer me something, a potato chip, a piece of fruit? I'll eat it and I'm gone. And, and whether he eats more somewhere else or not, this I have no idea. But this is a halachic statement, all right? We can deduce from Rav Huna's behavior that eating a Sabbath meal, you got to recite Kiddush where you eat. Got that down just fine. But the meal doesn't have to be a meal. It can be a snack, all right? So a snack, if you recite Kiddush and then eat something, you have fulfilled Shmuel's rule of reciting Kiddush at a meal. This is a lenient interpretation. I think you will understand that. I can only guess that this hungry rabbi then went home and was able in the dark to drink or to eat or whatever. But when he goes home, he doesn't have to recite Kiddush again because it would be the third Kiddush. That would be absurd. No, he fulfilled the rule. Now let's go to the next anecdote. It's on page 5. It's anecdote 6.3. And I'm going to skip the first line. It's just saying this rabbi too holds such and such. Now, the Amar Abbaye. Now, we've had Abbaye today. Abbaye is one of the most well-known rabbis in the Babylonian Talmud. He's an Amora. He's a well-known Amora. But in this particular anecdote, he's speaking as a student who's reporting on the behavior of his rabbi. And Abbaye had 2 main teachers, Rabbah and Rav Yosef. It's interesting because if we consider them competitors, he studied with both of them. How they felt about that, I don't know, but I'm not sure they were competitors. But we have many, many stories. We have many statements in which Abbaye is involved in halacha conversation with Rav Yosef, and here he's reporting an anecdote. Ki havena ben Mar. When I was at the home of Mar is the master, and he's talking about his teacher Rabbah. In many places, the Talmud Mar means Rabbah. Ki hava makadesh. When Rabbah would recite Kiddush on a Friday night, and again, you're getting this picture that at least in anecdotes 1 and 3, this one 6.1 and 6.3, that students are with their teachers on Friday night. Students are supposed to be at the beck and call of their teachers, and students are supposed to learn from their teachers 24/7. Okay, he says, I was at Beimar, and he would recite Kiddush, and when he recited Kiddush, he would say to us, Amarlan, he would say to us, Ta'imu midi, taste a little something, meaning have a snack, Dilma, ada azlitu leushpiza, because eat something here right after Kiddush, because perhaps when you go to your ushpiza is your lodgings, like the word ushpizin on Sukkot, when you go to your lodgings, mit akar l'chushraga, it could happen that the lamp will go out, v'lo makadosh l'cho b'veit achila, and you won't be able to recite Kiddush, meaning you won't be able to eat in your own lodgings, u'b'kiddusha dahacha lo nafkitu, and the Kiddush that you heard me recite here, that doesn't, you're not yet say Yidei Chavah, it doesn't fulfill your responsibility. You will not have discharged your obligation. The Ein Kiddush El B'Makom Suda, because Kiddush must be recited where you have your Sabbath meal. Now, again, you may not, too many details. Let me distill this for you into very simple terms. I see we got 5 minutes left and there's some Q&A. I have a feeling coming. This is an amazing further leniency. Rabbah, the teacher of Abbaye, is saying, I'm going to make Kiddush. I want you guys, you students of mine, have a snack, because in that way, even though you have planned from the outset to have your Sabbath meal in your lodgings, I didn't invite you to my Sabbath table tonight. You know very well that you're going to have your meal in your lodgings. However, it could happen, because it happens to some other rabbi, that the light is going to go out and you're not going to be able to eat, and you won't be able to fill reciting Kiddush at the place where you eat, because you won't be able to eat in the dark. So listen, I'm reciting Kiddush right now. Eat a little something. And then whatever happens after that, either you're going to have your meal or you're not going to have a meal because the light will go out. You will have fulfilled your obligation, and that'll be fine. So let me just say, what this rabbi has done has decoupled the Kiddush from the meal. He's basically, and this is of course why we have Kiddush in the synagogue, Shabbat lunch, because if you hear Kiddush in shul at the end of Sabbath services, and then you go eat a little something at Kiddush, you have fulfilled your obligation to hear Kiddush at your Sabbath meal, because this rabbi is telling us you can plan in advance to go home and have lunch. But if you hear Kiddush in the synagogue and eat, a piece of lox, you're done. You have fulfilled your obligation. Go home and eat your meal, nice, leisurely, and all that. By the way, most of us go home and recite Kiddush anyway, because as the rabbis say, there may be people in your own home who didn't hear Kiddush in the synagogue. I don't want to get into that. But there's something amazing here over the course of these 3 anecdotes. What began with, you have to recite Kiddush at the place you're having your Shabbat meal. In anecdote number 1, it got stringent. Can't recite Kiddush on the roof and eat the meal downstairs. Kiddush at the table. Anecdote number 2, oh no, you recited Kiddush, the light went out. You're going to have to repeat Kiddush somewhere else, wherever you're going to eat a meal. But even this is after the fact. You didn't plan to eat with your son. If you go to your son and you repeat Kiddush there and you just eat a little something, you've fulfilled your obligation. And then either you do eat or you don't eat more after that. You don't have to repeat a Kiddush again. And the third anecdote is saying you can plan in advance to have Kiddush, you can plan in advance to eat a meal, not with your rabbi, but if you hear your rabbi recite Kiddush and he offers you, a pistachio nut, that's it. You have fulfilled your obligation. So it's gone almost 180-degree turn from where we were before. So I'm going to make one general statement now. I hope that in the 5 anecdotes, although this was like 3 anecdotes in one, I hope with these anecdotes that we've looked at today, you have seen that these anecdotes are a lot more than just telling us, oh, Rabbi so-and-so is a role model. He, performed the halakha exactly the way he was supposed to. On the contrary, these rabbis, in the reports that we get, these little reports in the Talmud of how rabbis perform halakha, I am actually going out on a limb and saying in every single one of them, that rabbi or that report of how that rabbi carried out halakha, he slipped in some kind of change. There's one other possibility. He may have decided a disputed halakha according to one side or the other side. No time for that. So I'm just saying what at first seemed to be innocuous, sweet, little praiseworthy, praising details of how rabbis behave are actually just the opposite. When rabbis carry out the halakha, and if a report of that behavior makes it into the Talmud, it's in the Talmud in order to tell you this rabbi did something different from the way the earlier halacha legislated that he should do. Period. That is the point. And at least on my clock, we've got 4 minutes or so.
4 minutes, it's time for at least for a little snack. So one question that came up was, is the Babylonian Talmud more lenient than the Jerusalem Talmud? Or is there a sense of differentiation between those two?
Well, based on the anecdotes in the Babylonian Talmud, those rabbis over there in the land of Israel, they're coming down more stringently on a wide variety of halachot than are the rabbis in the Babylonian Talmud. But the very last page of my book, which is about Babylonian anecdotes, I bring one Jerusalem Talmud anecdote, and it shows exactly what the Babylonian anecdotes did, namely that in the anecdotal report in the Jerusalem Talmud, I didn't make a study of this, so I'm just putting this out there as a possibility. I happen to think I may be right, but I haven't studied it. I think in the Jerusalem Talmud as well, the laws may have been more strict to begin with, but as time went on, rabbis made, over there and in Babylonia, rabbis made changes.
There's also a question about the sense of how Jewish law is taken and how much of our sense of halacha is coming from the Talmud and how much of it is coming from Shulchan Aruch. If because the Talmud is putting forth one thing, but then it's really kind of codified and this is how you practice it, that's where the fence in the Torah comes in.
All right, I'm very happy to answer that question. I was curious as I was going through these anecdotes, what became Jewish law? Did those places where the anonymous voice limits the innovation, did that become halacha? Or in many places you don't have the anonymous voice? Did the rabbi who changed, modified the earlier rule, did that become halacha? And this is my finding. The Shulchan Aruch invariably presents to us the halacha as performed by these Babylonian Amoraim. However, the Shulchan Aruch and I do not approach Jewish law in the same way. I'm interested in tracing the evolution and development of Jewish law over time. Rabbi Yosef Karo, who authored the Shulchan Aruch, it came out in 1565, that's 16th century, not that long ago in terms of Jewish history, 400 years. The rabbi who wrote the Shulchan Aruch in no way implies that Jewish law in the Talmud was evolving. In no way is he suggesting that the anecdotes are introducing changes to what the law said before. He simply gives you the bottom line. However, consistently, the bottom line he gives you is in agreement with what that Amora did in the Talmud. So, it goes both ways. If you're somebody who wants to argue with me, you could say, look, there's no change in Shulchan Aruch. In other words, we Jews today, if you choose to be bound by the Shulchan Aruch, shall we say, has the last word on Jewish law, period, no change. And I'm not addressing that. I am saying that when I read the Talmud and I go from A to B to C to D, I see that rabbis performed Jewish law differently from the way their predecessors had formulated it, period. That's my, if you're interested in that.
I think that's actually, I think it's one of these things that when we think about Jewish law, there tends to be this sense, especially in thinking about halacha, that it's immutable, it's constant. And I love this interpretation and nuance that you're bringing to us, and that you're bringing it to us through story, because stories are the things that stick with people. Yes. People don't remember facts and figures, they remember stories. So this has been so enlightening. Thank you so much. I'm going to turn it back over to Tani to close us out here today. And thanks everyone for joining us.
Thank you, Ellie. Thank you, Dr. Hauptman. This is such a fascinating session, and I think we all learned so much. I hope you'll join us next week with Dr. Beverly Bayless will be teaching us the protest literature of Mizrahi writers. She'll be talking about how their stories give voice to their experiences in Israeli society. We hope you'll continue joining us for our series. Thank you so much.